Now, this is really just a fancy grammatical term for the word had. For example, I had already finished when he offered to help me. I had told him what to do the night before. I had never seen such a beautiful sunset. So this sense of had is called or referred to as the past perfect. Now, the key sound to achieve this in Spanish is había. Now, to that, we can create a key slide, and this is the one that you're going to need to memorize. We have había, habías, había, habíamos, and habían. So you can see that key sound of había repeating itself all the way down the line. So this would be I had había, you had habías. He, she, or it had había. Notice that it's the same for I. Then we had habíamos, and they had habían. Now, to that key sound, you will add the past participle of any verb. This is something that we've already looked at quite extensively with other tenses. For example, we have the verb hablar, which is to speak. So the past participle would be hablado, meaning spoken. Now, to express something like I had spoken, you would put those two elements together. So we have había hablado. I had spoken. Había hablado. What's the word for already? Ya. So how would you say I had already spoken? Ya había hablado. Remember that whenever we get the word already in Spanish, they tend to throw it at the front of the sentence. This is where it sounds most natural. So once again, I had already spoken. Ya había hablado. How would you say I had already spoken with him? Ya había hablado con él. I had already spoken with him this morning. Ya había hablado con él esta mañana. How would you say I hadn't spoken? No había hablado. What's the word for before? Antes. Now, how would you say I hadn't spoken with him before? No había hablado con él antes. Let's return back to that key slide once again. So we have había, habías, había, habíamos, and habían. We'll switch our focus now to the second one, you had, habías. How would you say you had spoken? Habías hablado. What about he, she, or it had spoken? Había hablado. It's the same as I. We had spoken. Habíamos hablado. They had spoken. Habían hablado. Let's try it with another verb, such as comer, to eat. So what would be the past participle of this verb comer? In other words, we want to say eaten. Comido. Now, how would you say I had eaten? Había comido. I had already eaten. Ya había comido. What's the word for never? Nunca. How would you say I had never eaten? Nunca había comido. Notice that just like the word already, never tends to also come up at the front of sentences in Spanish. It's where it sounds most natural. So we have nunca había comido. How would you say, I had never eaten tacos before? Nunca había comido tacos antes. How would you say you had eaten? Habías comido. He, she, or it had eaten. Había comido. We had eaten. Habíamos comido. How would you say, we had already eaten everything? Ya habíamos comido todo. What about, they had already eaten everything? Ya habían comido todo. So as you can see, we have two parts to this formula. On one side, we have this key sound of había, which runs all the way down the line. And onto that, you are going to tag the past participles of verbs. I'd also like to mention one more important thing. Whenever you have it or any other pronoun, for example, I had eaten it, this it is going to appear way up front at the very beginning of the phrase or the sentence. So this would be lo había comido. It I had eaten. Now it doesn't matter what pronoun it is, whether it's lo, la, los, or las, me, te, se, nos, se, le, les, even combined pronouns, mello, tello, sello, noslo, and so forth. Whatever combination or whatever pronoun it is, when you need to throw it into a sentence, it's always going to come here up front. Make sure that you remember that for the rest of this module. In part 2, we'll work with some of the most common verbs in Spanish and this idea of the past perfect, meaning the word had. Let's begin with ser. Now, we want the past participle, so we want to express been with the verb ser. What would that be? Sido. So how would you say, I had been? Había sido. How would you say, it had never been so easy? Nunca había sido tan fácil. What about, it had never been so difficult? Nunca había sido tan difícil. Next up, we have this sentence. She had been unhappy for a long time. The word for unhappy is infeliz. Había sido infeliz por mucho tiempo. You could have also used the hace formula and say hace mucho tiempo que había sido infeliz. Either way. Let's look at the verb estar now. What's the past participle? Estado. If we have a sentence like, I had been working there for a long time. So here we have the past perfect with had been, but we also have the ing tense here with working. So be careful when you try to translate this one. Había estado trabajando allí por mucho tiempo. So I had been, había estado, working, trabajando, there for a long time, allí por mucho tiempo. We had only been here a short while when they told us what happened. Solo habíamos estado aquí poco tiempo cuando nos dijeron lo que pasó. Some of you might have got caught out here where it says for a short while or a short while. In Spanish, this is we had only been here short time, poco tiempo, cuando nos dijeron lo que pasó. One more. They had been driving for 3 hours when the car ran out of petrol. This phrase, ran out of petrol, would be se quedó sin gasolina. Habían estado manejando por 3 horas cuando el carro se quedó sin gasolina. Here we have again this use of ing with had been. So they had been, habían estado, driving, manejando. Let's take the verb hacer. What's the past participle? Hecho. How would you say, I had already done it before? Ya lo había hecho antes. Hopefully you remembered to put the it, this pronoun, way up front. And we already know that the word already goes way up front as well. So we have ya lo había hecho antes. Already it I had done before. How would you say, had you already done it before? Asking it as a question. ¿Ya lo habías hecho antes? I knew that we had done everything possible to help her. This phrase, everything possible, in Spanish would be todo lo posible. Sabía que habíamos hecho todo lo posible para ayudarle. Up until now, they had always done the right thing. The right thing would simply be lo correcto. Hasta ahora, siempre habían hecho lo correcto. The verb ver. What's the past participle? Visto. How would you say, I had never seen her behave like this before? Nunca la había visto comportarse así antes. Here we have the word never up front and the pronoun for her. Never her I had seen. Then to behave herself, comportarse así antes. I was thinking that you hadn't seen the film yet. Pensaba que todavía no habías visto la película. This should have an accent over the I. Let's fix this. The next one is, he had finally seen his mistake. Finalmente, había visto su error. We had seen them only once before at the party. Los habíamos visto solo una vez antes en la fiesta. How would you say, neither of us had ever seen that woman before? Neither of us would be ninguno de nosotros. Ninguno de nosotros habíamos visto esa mujer antes. One more. In that moment, I knew they had seen enough. En ese momento, supe que habían visto suficiente. Here we have I knew, supe que habían visto suficiente. Not sabía, because we're specifically saying in that moment. Let's work with decir. What's the past participle? Dicho. How would you say, I had already told him what he should do many times before? Ya le había dicho lo que debería hacer muchas veces antes. So already to him I had said or I had told. Ya le había dicho. Then we have what in the middle of a sentence. So lo que he should do, debería hacer. Many times before, muchas veces antes. How would you say, I had already said it to him once before? Ya se lo había dicho una vez antes. Here we have the it to him, ya se lo había dicho. Notice that I have a slight variation here. You can put antes at the end, copying the English, and that will sound okay. It's not necessarily a mistake. However, if you really want to mimic native speakers, what they will do is put the antes after the word dicho. So they would say, ya se lo había dicho antes una vez. This is a rather complex structure to try to remember. So if you're going to continue saying it this way, that's perfectly fine. I just wanted to point out that they would probably do it this way instead with a slightly different word order. What's the verb to ignore? Ignorar. How would you say, I had already said it to him once before and he ignored me? Ya se lo había dicho una vez antes y me ignoró. Here again, I've given you the alternative where they would put antes directly after the word dicho. So, ya se lo había dicho antes una vez y me ignoró. How would you say, he did it even though you had already told him it was a mistake? Lo hizo aunque ya le habías dicho que era un error. So he did it, lo hizo, even though is aunque. You had already told him, so ya le habías dicho. Already to him you had told that it was a mistake, que era un error. What about this one? She had never told me this before. Nunca me había dicho esto antes. Notice the use of the word esto, because this is just in a general sense, the word for this. So, nunca me había dicho, she had never, to me, told this. How would you say, her mother had told her many times, and we'll use the pronoun of it to her here in order to make it sound most natural. Su mamá se lo había dicho muchas veces. We had already told my parents what happened. Be a little bit careful here. Ya les habíamos dicho a mis padres lo que pasó. That's the reason I told you to be a little bit careful, because we have the personal a. We have a verb followed by people. Notice that we're also saying we had told to them, so using the pronoun of les. Next one is, until that moment, they hadn't said a single word to me. Hasta ese momento, no me habían dicho ni una palabra. Notice the use of ni here. This means even or not even. Now, we're not saying that in English, but it is implied. You could put it in if you wanted to. For example, until that moment, they hadn't even said a single word to me. Now, when this type of feeling is expressed in Spanish, they throw in the word ni for even or not even. So, hasta ese momento, no me habían dicho ni una palabra. Let's work with the verb dar, to give. What's the past participle? Dado. How would you say, I told him that I had already given it to you? Le dije que ya te lo había dado. Here we have the joint pronouns of it to you. So I told him, le dije, that I had already given it to you. So, ya te lo había dado. I thought you still hadn't given it to them. Pensé que todavía no se lo habías dado. You could also say pensaba, just depending on what context you were meaning. If you said pensaba, that's also correct. So the word for still is todavía, and now we have our joint pronouns, it to them. No se lo habías dado. She had never given me a present like that. Nunca me había dado un regalo así. They had never given him an opportunity. Nunca le habían dado una oportunidad. So, never to him they had given. Nunca le habían dado a chance or an opportunity. Una oportunidad. This is the last verb we'll work with, ir. What's the past participle? Ido. How would you say, I had gone? Había ido. Now we can use the verb ir reflexively to mean to leave. So we have irse. If we wanted to express I had left, that would be me había ido. Here you can see the reflexive pronoun being used. Myself, I had gone. Me había ido. So this means I had left. Let's use it. They arrived at 9 o'clock, but I had already left. Llegaron a las 9, pero ya me había ido. I was still at the house, I hadn't left, when she called to tell me the news. Todavía estaba en la casa. No me había ido cuando llamó para decirme la noticia. It had already left when you arrived. Be careful here. Ya se había ido cuando llegaste. Here we had to change the reflexive pronoun to se because we're referring to it. So, ya se había ido. It had already left. Cuando llegaste, when you arrived. In this lesson, we were working with some quite complicated sentences. So, it's completely normal if you were making mistakes here and there. I would advise you to repeat this video a couple of times until you feel comfortable with it, because while we were working on the past perfect, meaning had, we were also including lots of other bits and pieces of glue and structure. So with everything combined together, there's a lot to extract from this lesson.